Hello, ghostly listeners. You've got Jake here, and today is a very special episode. In fact, it's actually part one of two. And with this episode, we sit down with Ross Allison, the founder of AGHOST, the Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle, Tacoma, as well as Spooked in Seattle. And he'll give us some tips on what it's like to run a paranormal ghost hunting type business. So with that, let's get into it and learn about offering a ghost tour, as well as being an author. Two main ways to increase your revenue as a professional ghost hunter. Hey, Ross, thanks for joining. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm fine and dandy. How was Christmas for you?
Well, the COVID Christmas is as best as it ever could get, with the limitations that we all are suffering from. But it was still nice. I got to see some of my family and, hung out with our good and dear friend June.
So, Ross, today's subject is, can you make a living as a ghost hunter? And you, as someone who is a paranormal entrepreneur, has some experience in this. So if you could, would you give us a little bit background about how you went from ghost hunting to this entrepreneur, if I could talk, right? Entrepreneurial.
It's your show. You can make up words if you like.
Yeah. So how'd you turn your ghost hunting into a business? Let's get real. Give me the background on that one.
Well, if you would have come to me, 20 years earlier and said, hey, Ross, you're going to be, a full-time ghost hunter, I probably would have laughed at you. Because, 20 years ago, it was not even considered to be a career opportunity. Ghost hunting was not as hip as it is today. In fact, most people pretty much would laugh at you if you were a ghost hunter. So for me, my passion has always been this fascination with ghosts. I loved good ghost stories. I loved watching, the movies, the shows that were out there, not, the ghost hunting shows. There weren't ghost hunting shows back then, but you had shows like, Haunted History or Unsolved Mysteries where they dabble in, ghost stories every, so often. So, for me, I never imagined that my life would actually move to the fact that I would be a full-time ghost hunter. Back then I was, in retail. So I was a retail manager. But I think what really motivated me to do it was the fact that once I started my group, AGHOST, the Advanced Ghost Hunters of Seattle, Tacoma, it really did start to take off, and very quickly, because, we were one of the first ghost hunting groups in the Northwest. And so we started getting a lot more attention, and the demand for ghost hunts back then, where it was a lot. I mean, we were busy every weekend doing, 1 to 2 ghost hunts every weekend. So it was crazy. It really was. And so it's really started to eat up a lot of my time. And I was, getting frustrated because, being in retail, you kind of had to work weekends. And it was getting harder and harder to get the time off. So I basically had to just quit my retail job. And I wanted to pursue something in this field. I didn't know what exactly. But I was fortunate enough that I had a little bit of a nest egg to kind of, live off of that for a little bit until I decided one of the things I first wanted to do was ghost tours. Being that I was traveling a lot as well, I was always, taking the local ghost tours, and I started to find my biggest frustration with the ghost tours was they tend to make up a lot of stories or dramatized stories because their main focus was to scare people because it was a ghost tour. And being a ghost hunter, you hear a lot of these amazing stories of these places, and for me, it's like, oh my God, I want to ghost hunt this place. And so I'd contact, the owners. And as I was, doing the interviews and research, I found out a lot of the stories that they were telling on the ghost tour weren't real. And even the people that own the place were telling me, yeah, these stories aren't real. And it was just such a letdown. And so as I started to do more and more research, and I was working on my book, Spooked in Seattle, I had all this information, these stories, and these evidence that we had collected from our own personal investigations. And so that just kind of inspired me to develop a ghost tour of Seattle. And so I took, the research that we were doing, and my main focus was to tell the real stories, get people inside haunted places and hopefully have experiences. And so for me, that was the big start in my career in ghost hunting. So I went from retail to ghost tours. And then I started writing more books because I love doing the books as well. And again, my main focus has always been the open honesty in this field. Because granted, as many amazing places that I've been to, the deepest, darkest, scariest places that you could imagine, I could tell you some, grand, stories of ghosts. But to be honest, with all my research, I found that a lot of these stories weren't true. And so I felt as a writer and a researcher, I needed to get that out to people. I needed to put an end to a lot of these, false stories. And so that was another thing that kind of inspired me to write books. Because another thing too, somebody had told me one thing that really stuck with me is like, once it's published, it's forever. And I started to realize that research, that material needs to be out there. And, and so that's what really pushed me to get out there and write a lot of these books. And then, of course, once I started writing the books, then I started getting asked to do lectures and teaching classes. And so I just found myself going down all these different avenues because one hand fed the other. And here I am, a full-time ghost hunter.
So let's step back, because this is for the business thinking folks here, is when it came to starting up the ghost tour, what kind of obstacles, hurdles did you have to come around just to get that tour started up? And what are some things, if someone's thinking of taking that route, they should understand before they get into that type of business?
Well, for me, it was a little easier because you also have to understand that when I started doing a lot of this stuff, I was the first or one of very few doing this. So it wasn't so competitive that it is today. When it came to ghost tours in Seattle, there were only two other ghost tours, the Market Ghost Tour, and there was another bus tour at the time. And so I really didn't have to compete with anybody else. I was very respectful. I knew that there was a Market Ghost Tour, so I avoided the market because I did not want to, start a fight with, anybody else, because people in the paranormal field are very territorial, especially in the ghost tour companies as well. They can get very territorial. So for me, it was all about, okay, there's already a Market Ghost Tour, so I'm going to go around the water and go around the market and tell different stories and respect the Market Ghost Tour. So that's one of the things that you do have to look into if you're looking to start a ghost tour. Be respectful of the fact that there are people out there that may be in your area also doing tours. Find out what they're doing, maybe introduce yourself, and maybe look at doing a tour that is not interfering with what they're trying to do. And it's hard because, again, a lot of these people do get competitive, and it is a very competitive business nowadays.
Mm-hmm. So when it came to,
go ahead.
Quickly, since we're on the topic of positioning your business, so in a way, it's the territory, but what else can you do to make your tour unique versus the competitors?
Well, you do have to know what the competitors are doing. I think what made our tour more unique is the standard ghost tour will walk you around the area and point to locations and tell you some ghost stories. The worst ones are the ones that will point or talk about a place that is blocks away. They'll say, oh, just down the block at the end of the street, there's a house or there's a business. I hate that. If they're not going to take the effort to take you to that place and stand in front of it, don't bother. You know, I've been on a lot of tours that do that. So as I said, the standard ghost tour will just walk you around and stand outside the businesses or the homes and tell you their stories. I think what makes ours a little more unique is we take you inside some of the places. We give you the chance to experience them. We'll share evidence that we actually collected from EVPs or even video clips. So I think those are kind of the unique elements that draw in more people. And then plus it's run by real ghost hunters.
Yeah. And that helps with the whole evidence thing. I mean, that's a pretty powerful position to have versus competitors who are just, hey, have some drinks. Let's walk around around the city.
Yeah. So most ghost tours are just storytellers or even actors, you know, that have a side gig, you know, because they're not, on the stage performing. So you find a lot of that as well as with most tour guides. They tend to be actors.
Now, one of the things, and this comes up quite a bit actually with ghostly readers, they ask, well, how do I make these connections with the people that own or manage these haunted sites? How can I work with them, collaborate with them to have access for the ghost or haunting tour?
Well, that's a tough one because one of the things that you have to understand, there's still an element where some businesses don't like to be labeled haunted, especially hotels, because they do feel that it can affect their clientele. Some people don't want to check into a haunted hotel. But surprisingly, and I try to remind them this, is ghosts are a hot commodity. In fact, I've learned this just from writing books, that there are a number of hotels that will make up ghost stories, and come to find out their most haunted room is their most expensive room. So, because a lot of people will book a haunted room, years in advance to have the opportunity to have a paranormal encounter. So it's one of those things where I have come across some of the businesses where they don't want to talk about the ghost stories. You try to be respectful. One of the things that when you're standing outside of a business on the sidewalk, you can basically say anything you want to say. There's really nothing you can do it. Free speech is basically as they put it. But if you're personally on their property, that's when they can come after you if they don't like what you're saying. So always, for me, I've always, as I said, I keep things open and honest. My idea is not to try and scare people. And I think that's where a lot of ghost tours tend to hurt a lot of businesses, because their main focus is to scare people. And that's where, sometimes they can drive away some of their business. So for me, it's always try to keep it, positive, engaging, exciting. And so I think that's the best part in trying to build your businesses with, other business. When you're trying to build your business with other businesses, you definitely do have to have some sort of engaging environment with the owners. Because, again, as I said, one hand feeds the others. So if you have a good working partnership with the businesses that are on your tours, obviously they're going to promote you and hopefully give you more opportunities to hopefully bring in your tour into their business. So definitely you want to, reach out to the locations that you would like to talk about. You also want to talk to the business owner and tell them your stories that you want to talk about. Because I've learned just from doing that some of the stories that you have researched or have been told may not be what they're actually experiencing in the business. And it's only going to hurt your tour if you're promoting this location. And of course, after the tour, they go to that location like, oh, yeah, we heard the story. We're so excited to meet this ghost. And then come to find out, oh, that's not what they're actually experiencing. So you do have to do your research. And that research is actually going into the locations and talking to the business owners, talking to the employees, finding what they're experiencing. So that's going to help out quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And you'll find that a lot of times most businesses are pretty open to talking about it. Especially when you're offering them an opportunity to promote their business.
Mm-hmm. So that brings me up to the next question that I have for you. And that deals with what kind of, this is business, right? What's the rev share? Ideally, they're going to get something, you're going to get something by doing this. What is that balance when it comes to the revenue share between, say, your business and getting connected to one of these haunted locations?
Well, I think for most of it, you're not really paying a lot of places to get into unless they have, most places will let you go in for free because, again, you're bringing business to them because you're encouraging people after the tours come back. If it's a bar, come back, have a drink here. There's very few times where you do have to share certain elements of your tour. I have had situations where I'll allow a certain business to sell tickets. And if they do sell tickets for the tour, then they get a certain percentage off the tickets. And then, of course, pub tours, you'd like to encourage, them to get a drink when you bring them into the pub and you're talking about their ghosts. You may have to give them a certain percentage. Of course, you have to give them, pay for the drinks because drinks legally aren't free. We've learned that lessons. You can't advertise, even though we were paying for the drinks, you cannot advertise free drinks. It may be different, for each state, but it's one of the things that we learned. You cannot advertise free drinks. So obviously there is a percentage that you have to pay for the drinks that you'll be offering on your haunted pub tours.
That's good to know. Now, since we're on the topic of pricing, how do you go about pricing out what tickets would be for each one of your tours? I guess this kind of goes into another topic I'm interested in for our listeners, and that is, how do you keep the tour fresh? Since you've been running Spooked in Seattle for, what's it been? It's been a good 10 years, right?
No, it's been going on, I think, almost 15 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, how, you've learned a lot over there. Let's just talk about
Jay.
There's nothing wrong with wisdom, maturity, and experience. So when it comes to pricing out these tickets for tours, how do you go through that modeling?
Well, you want to look at what other tours are charging. And be comparable to them. Never undersell your tour because it's going to cause a lot of problems. Because it's not fair for a business that is actually doing the same kind of tours you're doing, and you're undercutting them just to steal customers. Because we all have, our own fees that we have to pay. Sometimes you have to pay rent. Sometimes you have to pay for advertising. And then you get a new tour that just comes in, and they're going to sell their tickets for the same kind of a tour, for, 2-hour tour. You're going around to the same places. You're probably hearing basically the same stories, and they're going to charge, $5 cheaper. That's kind of, nasty business. You just want to be, a fairly compared. Sorry, I'm having a hard time now talking too. I'm going to blame you for this. You want to be competitive at a fair level with all the other tours that are offering the same thing. So it's just looking to see what all the other tours are charging. That's basically what I did. I saw what the other tours were charging, and I charged the same thing. Same price.
Okay. So it's all very, very market-based.
And it is. And it changes from city to city. I've been, I've taken some ghost tours in some cities, and I've paid, $10 for a 90-minute tour, and then you go to some other cities and they'll charge you 15, some as high as $19 as well. So it really depends on the city you're going to as well. Like if you go to New Orleans, a place that's notorious for being haunted, they're probably going to charge a lot more for their ghost tours.
True. Now, let's get back to the freshness question because, Spooked in Seattle and that haunted historic tour through Pioneer Square. How do you keep that fresh? Just so you know, I've taken it like 7-8 times because every time I bring a guest to Seattle, I'm like, you want to learn about Seattle? Let's do the Pioneer Square haunted tour. But how do you keep the freshness up, and when do you decide to revamp a tour?
Well, obviously, and you're a prime example, when you get a lot of repeat customers. And I think, for one, each tour guide has their own stories. We do not give out scripts. I do not believe in scripts because then, like for you, an example, each time you take a tour with a different tour guide, you're going to hear the exact same story in the exact same way. And so I do not believe in scripts. We have our basic stories, and they learn the stories and they'll tell it their own way. But then there's also a lot more. And so I always say you have to know the extra stories, because as you're going around, different things happen on different tours, or you have different kinds of people on your tour. A lot of times you'll be doing a tour and there'll be a lot of kids on your tour. So then you want to make it more kid friendly. So I really push my tour guides. They have to read the book. They have to, know all the stories of Pioneer Square, because there are some stories that aren't the standard stories. But when you're doing a tour and you realize that your group might be, more kids, then you have the kid friendly stories that you might want to throw on your tour because you know them, or even some of the stops that might be more kid friendly. So that I feel is very important, is don't have a script. Just have your basic stories, know where your stops are, your standard stops on your tour, but your tour guides do need to know all the other stories as well so they can customize their tour. But also too, if you're going to haunted places, the stories are always going to change. There's always going to be new experiences. So my tour guides and myself, we would always go in every so often and talk to the employees, talk to the owners. Hey, what's happened recently? And so those will give you new stories and new experiences that you can add to your tours as well. So those are some of the ways to keep it fresh. I'm constantly always looking for new locations to add to the tours, especially for the ghost hunts, because we offer public ghost hunts. So I'm always keeping an eye out for new places that we can open that door of revenue and experiences for the tours.
And one last question on the topic of ghost tours. What do you think is the best way to advertise and market your tour?
That's a tough one, because marketing can be very, very expensive. And in some ways, we haven't been able to afford some of the marketing. Especially when you're paying rent for a location, that can be very expensive as well. So marketing, as we find, the best way is online. Get your name out there as much as possible. Sharing links is also very important, especially if you're going to partner with a lot of businesses. Have the business post a link to your website for your tours. Have flyers. Flyers are an inexpensive way to get word out as well. We'll produce a lot of flyers, and then we'll take them to a lot of the businesses that are on the tour, so that when people are at that pub, they'll see a flyer and grab it and say, "Oh, okay, they talk about this place." But otherwise, when you get into marketing, being featured in magazines and all that, you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars a month. So that can be extremely expensive. So I guess it really depends on how much money your tour is making, and how much you want to put into it. Luckily for me, I've got 15 years of running this tour that we're pretty much well known. So we've had a lot of stories, media cover us, and a lot of the businesses are aware of us around the area as well.
Okay, thanks for that. New subject. Let's get back to your writing. And how did that come to be?
Well, the writing was the fact that it all started with, well, my first book was Ghostology 101, which I had written with Joe Teeples, who was my VP at the time. And he was the one that told me, that once it's published, it's forever, which was, to me, became very important because I started to realize, as I had been in the ghost hunting field for quite some time at that point, we're looking at close to 30 years now. I started to see a lot of these groups, popping up and disappearing, because the average life expectancy of a ghost hunting group is about 3 years. Because it is all volunteer. People don't, realize that we're not getting paid to ghost hunt, or most of us aren't getting paid to ghost hunt. So it all comes out of our own pockets, our own time to do this. And so I started to realize that as I was trying to reach out to other groups, in other states, and having experience with other groups, I'd reach out to them and say, hey, you remember that evidence that we collected at that, that one hotel we stayed at? I'd like to get a copy of that, or be able to review that again, or, find out some information about that. And then I go to their website or try to email them, and they're gone. And I realized that evidence is gone as well. And so that was one of the main factors that really pushed me to write the books. Is like, we're seeing a lot of these experiences, a lot of this evidence disappear with a lot of these groups. And so that was hurting us. It was hurting the society of ghost hunting, because we need to share that information. We need to know that when we investigate certain locations and we have certain experiences, that other people that have investigated these locations can share and validate those experiences as well. And so when that information is gone permanently, or not out there for people to look at and review, then it only hurts us as a society to research and further the advancements of ghost hunting. And so I felt it was really important that those stories needed to get published. And so that was one of the main reasons. But then as I continued to do more and more research, I also started to find that there was a lot of fake stories out there as well, or some of the stories had been altered from the true facts, or what really happened. And so, as I've always said, with every ghost story, there's always a root to it. Ghost stories change throughout the years, throughout the decades, because, like the game, the telephone game, one person will tell a story to one person, and that person will tell it to somebody else. And by the time it reaches the end of the line, it's not the original story. That's just how we operate as a society. So for me, it was really important to get back to the root of the story, of the experience, and get that out there. And so those were the main elements that really inspired me to start writing. Mm-hmm. And, people tend to think, just because, I'm going on book number 10 now, I can't believe I have 10 books. But people think that, you can make a living off of, writing books, and you really can't, unless you're featured as a top 10. You will struggle. You do need other jobs to pay the bills. You, Jake, have written a couple books yourself. Do you think you could quit your job and just live off of that?
Oh, hell no.
And I'm on 10 books. So it's just it's a nice bonus check, every, few months that you'll get for writing books, but it's not enough to live off of. Mm-hmm. So
I mean, on that subject, let's get into making the living off the book. So for you, everyone wants to get published. What was your journey to finding a publisher and getting the books out to the masses?
Well, to be honest, it was a big struggle, because you have to remember, when I started this, ghost hunting was not the big thing. And funny too is you weren't really considered an established, paranormal investigator unless you had a book. So getting a book published was a big struggle. You really had to have a name for yourself. And at the time, I was still very fresh in the field. I wasn't like the Warrens, so I could, just go out there and get a book deal. So my first book ended up being with, Joe Teeples, and that was just self-published, and that was Ghostology 101, just some of the basics of ghost hunting. So that, was my first stepping stone, was, getting into the self-publishing. Now, anybody can publish a book, thanks to like Amazon. You could just write your book and get it out there, which is a lot easier. But back then it was still a lot harder. As ghost hunting started to become more popular, thanks to the television shows, there were a lot of publishers that were looking to put out a ghost series. So there was a few of those out there that were advertising for people that were ghost hunting so that they could put out a ghost, book in each state. And so that is what led me to my next opportunity. Is I, being that I was an established ghost hunter in the Northwest, I had a publishing company reach out to me and say, hey, we would like to have a ghost hunting book in, the Northwest area. Would you be interested? And so that's when I actually wrote Spooked in Seattle. It was another avenue to do that. And then once I did Spooked in Seattle, I continued to do, my research and writing books. And that's where I decided to go down a different avenue. And what happened was I had written my book, My Haunted Journal, and it was a basic ghost hunting book. And I had started putting it out there because I had already had, a few books under my belt, and I wanted to get that book out there, because the problem with a lot of the ghost hunting books, the how-to books, was they were either too technical or too metaphysical. And so I wanted a book that was going to be more simple for the basic person who may be experiencing paranormal activity and not really know what to do, or not really understand the elements of ghost hunting. But the other thing that, My Haunted Journal was more unique was it also taught people to journal their experiences. Because remember how I talked about the root to a ghost story or an experience? This was one of the elements to help us maintain that root. Because I started to find that, even when we were investigating a lot of haunted places, the clients tend to manipulate their stories or experiences to convince us that what they experienced was real. Their intent was not to lie to us, but they wanted to convince people that they were really having an experience. And so that's where the stories start to get altered. And so journaling was so important to me, and I felt so important to the field that I wanted to get that out there. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote My Haunted Journal. And I struggled so hard to get that book out, because a lot of these publishing companies had already put out a how-to ghost hunt book. So I was a little late to the table to present this element. And so I just sat on that book for such a long time. And then David Weatherly contacted me, and David had already produced a few books, and he really loved my book, Spooked in Seattle. And he says, how do you feel about working on a project together? And I said, sure, it would be an honor to work with David Weatherly. And so we had come up with the idea of doing Haunted Toys. And it was my idea to make it into a series. And after we did Haunted Toys, I told him, I said, I have this other book that I haven't been able to get published. Would you be interested in it? And so he said, sure, send it off to me. And so I sent it off to him, and he loved it. And he saw the value in this book. And so that, ended up really solidifying me and David's relationship. And we really have been working hard to do the Haunted series, and a few other projects that we've done on the side as well. So once I hooked up with David Weatherly and found my publishing company that I was happy with, it just kind of took off from there.
Now, since we're on the subject of publishing, let's talk about the revenue.
Yes, the revenue.
It's always a big no. I mean, we know this stuff is niche. And I will say from my personal experience, because I've written 3 books, one on ghost stories, one on how to ghost hunt, and one on some really nerdy technical stuff. And ghost stories sells like 10, 15 times better than the other ones.
True.
So when you find that niche, it sounds like series are good. But when it comes to making the money off of it, what are some tips for negotiating? Because different publishers and businesses do it differently. Some are a straight commission. Some are they pay you a flat fee for a book. So what do you think would be best for a new author in this space?
Well, that's the problem is, a lot of these publishing companies are going to want to know, how are you going to help sell the book? That is the most important thing for somebody when they're going to sign you on to do a book is like, how are you going to help sell the book? Because a lot of companies aren't going to go out of their way to, publish or to market your book. They're hoping that they can just put it on the shelves and your name will sell it alone. So if you do not have yourself established, that's going to really affect you. So if you're not established, you're probably going to look at a situation where you're probably going to have to self-publish for a little bit and build up your audience, build up your name, your credibility as a writer. So that is a big thing to consider. In most cases, even though I had established a name, that's what helped me, get, Spooked in Seattle on with a more notable publishing company. I went on to a different one, and I'm not going to say names, but there's one book that I published through another company, and I have not received 1 penny for that book. And that book's been out for quite some time yet. And every time they send me, the stats on, how many have sold, they always have an excuse as to why they can't pay me at the end because, this and such, sold. So you didn't reach this amount. So we're not going to. So it's just been a nightmare, so it's just one of those things you just kind of have to make a wash and say, okay, move on.
Yeah, I would say I have heard that quite a bit where not necessarily, we know about not getting the commissions. It's kind of like record deals back in the 50s and 60s. But one of the things is about they being the publishers want you to be the draw so they don't have to work so hard to sell your books. And I find, and we're going to talk about the media production side in a little bit, but I find that's why the folks on the ghost hunting shows have such an easy time because they come with a built-in audience and they can figure out how many units will be sold. They don't have to work as hard to get the book sold.
And it's kind of sad it's that way too, because I travel all over the US, all over the world. And there were a few of the companies that I had worked with, publishing companies, and I had gone to them and said, hey, I would like to write a book about, New Orleans. I've been to New Orleans quite a bit. I've investigated a lot of places in New Orleans. I've got some great evidence and great stories that I could, put into this book. And they're like, well, do you live in New Orleans? No, I live in the Northwest. Well, no, unfortunately, we're not interested. So they wanted to skip, me because I did not live in New Orleans because I wasn't going to be in New Orleans to help market and sell the book. That's what they wanted. They wanted local people to write the stories about their haunted places. And that's where I found that was a big mistake, because then you find a lot of these people that were just writing the books had no interest in the paranormal. They just had an opportunity to write, here's a company that's looking for, authors to write about, the ghosts of, New Orleans. So there's really not a lot of heart and soul that goes into a lot of these books, or even the correct research. So that's why you have a lot of these books, with authors that have no, interest in the paranormal, doing a lot of these books just because, this publishing company wanted to have a series that covered all the different states and all the different cities, and so that was kind of frustrating for me because, I had the opportunity to, or the desire to write about all these different places, and I couldn't because, they didn't want that. They wanted somebody local to do it. And so that was another, big spark for working with David Weatherly, because me and David do both travel a lot. And so we had these experiences at all these amazing places. And now, we're not limited to just writing in our region. We can write about any place that we've ever been to. And so that's why our series Haunted covers, all over the US.
Mm-hmm. So I think we should talk about the self-publishing side of the house, because I'm a self-published author. But the reason why I did that is using Amazon as the example. It's just the distribution is so easy. And the commissions you get, at least in the case of Amazon, they're very upfront about what you're going to get based on how long the book is and how much you're charging for it, because they don't set the price. You set the price. You pretty much do everything. I think that's one of the things is you have to market it yourself. The chances you get a much higher commission, which is if you're pricing your book at like $2.99, your Kindle book, like you're going to make 70% off that as a commission. And that sounds really good to a new author, but I don't think they understand how difficult it is to market a new book.
And that's a big thing too, is marketing plays a big part of it. You have to do all the work when you self-publish. And so if you aren't that individual, luckily for you, you have a popular website. And I also want to say kudos to the fact that you did, put out your books, because now it's forever. Your website's only going to be around as long as you're around to support it and feed it. But once your time is gone, the website's gone, and all that work that you have done is gone. But now that you've published, it's forever. So, so I'd encourage anybody like in your shoes, like, if you've been putting all this work into a website, you've written all this, amazing research, you do, publish it, get it out there in a book.
I did blog a book, people. So, I mean, don't underestimate blogging and using the web, even though, yes, the books do read like articles from my website. That's because they are.
But that's still a smart move for you, because like I said, your website's only going to be around as long as you are. So now your research is forever, because it'll continue on. Your books will continue on after you're gone, as long as there's somebody willing, to buy them.
Yeah.
So I think that was a very, very smart move for all the work that you've done so far in this.
So on the topic of writing still, so Ross, you're working on a new book. What else do you have planned for your Haunted series?
Oh my God, we have a whole huge list. You name it, we pretty much have it on the list, from hospitals to islands, we're working on it quite a bit, and I don't want to put everything out there. But the series I find it's been fun to work on. And I think our success also stems from the fact that we have no problem saying that this story is not true. And I think that helps to make us more credible as paranormal investigators. Is, it's fun to tell a creepy, scary ghost story, but if that creepy, scary ghost story is not real, I'm going to tell you. It's unfortunate. We've had to debunk a lot of stories out there that have been told for decades that are really good stories. But I want the truth to be out there for people, because, if I'm going to call myself a paranormal investigator, I have to go off the reality, off the facts, off of what's really going on out there to help us better understand the paranormal world. And you can't, as I've always said, you can't use the paranormal to prove the paranormal. And if you're basing your research off of fake stories, and you may not know they're fake.
Urban legends. Yeah.
Right. Or urban legends, then you're not really helping to advance us in any way.
Now, what do you think is best for a new paranormal, I'll say nonfiction author? Because if you're doing paranormal fiction, I mean, you'd be following a Stephen King pathway or a Clive Barker pathway. Yeah. But for the new nonfiction author, do you think it's best to write your first book first or try to seek out a publisher with just an outline?
You know what? I just write your first book first, because it's so much easier if you are trying to look for a publisher, you have the material. Because one of the things, if they are even slightly interested in you, they're going to want some examples of your material. So if you already have that done, then you're halfway there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've already taken the time to do the work, you can, try to sell it to a publishing company. Just realize you're not going to make a lot of money off of it. The standard is 10% is what you make off of each book that you sell. So that is a standard.
Mm-hmm.
It'll go up as you get more and more books out there, as long as they're asking for more and more books from you. Then you can obviously get that percentage up.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, you're going to look at 10%, which is not a lot, honestly, for a book. And then, of course, if you've already written the book, then go ahead, and you can't get somebody to publish it for you, then you have the opportunity to publish it yourself. And as you said, you can make 70%.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you got to do a lot more work because you now have to market yourself.
Yeah. And the other thing you can do, especially if you like to write a lot, like I do, and mind you, I'm not promoting Amazon. It's just that's the biggest source for book sales. And if you do the Kindle Unlimited thing, you get a commission off pages read. It's only $1 for every 250 pages. So it behooves you to write a lot. Because that 250 pages could be from any combination. It doesn't have to be a single book. So there's another revenue stream. And I know authors who write fiction that do this quite a bit. They will publish a novella every 2 or 3 months. But I would say get a good editor if you're new, because they'll really help. Yeah.
Editing is a big thing. And it's sad, too, because with Spooked in Seattle, they obviously didn't have a good editor for my book. And so I've received a few bad reviews because of poor editing. You want to trust them that when you give them the book that they're going to do a perfect job. But obviously that's not the case too.
Yeah.
And my mistake is I didn't go back and review my book, after they had edited it. So, you learn from your mistakes.
Very true. And so I would say, if anything, the biggest advice I could give anyone is get an editor, but get a real editor, because a lot of times they'll just proofread it, looking for typos and punctuation mistakes. You want an editor that knows content, how to sculpt content, structure the book for the narrative flow, stuff like that. And I know we're talking nonfiction, but I'm even a magazine editor, because most ghost stories that you're going to run into, they're short stories, right? They're going to be 3 to 4 pages tops, like a magazine. Magazine editors, I find, are very good at sculpting the kind of books that Ross and I write.
Yeah, because you have to understand that they're only limited a certain word count.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you have to learn the craft. And a lot of times you're going to go over, in most cases, you're going to go over that word count. And so now they have to edit it down to fit within that space.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the magics of having somebody like that, because they can learn what necessarily needs to be cut and not lose the content of your story.
Yeah. Or another thing is you could take online or a community college or something, take some basic journalism classes. It helps a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
In the second part of the interview with Ross, we discuss what it's like to get a TV deal, expectations for making any money off that TV deal, and then we also take a look into the lecture circuit, which you don't really hear about as much with ghost hunters, but there are universities and colleges that will pay to have you come out and give a lecture on being a ghost hunter and doing ghost hunts, and how it may or may not be as lucrative as you think. So look for that one in about a week's time. Take care.